that you should be worried. I have now made 4 videos about this, and obviously I have a very limited reach, but if you are watching this, I would like for you to please warn others about what is happening with Donald Trump establishing his police state. So I have talked about these 2 executive orders that he passed on the 28th of last month, and I'm going to read you 3 excerpts from him that I found them to be important, that everybody should know about what is happening. First, Secretary of Defense, in coordination with the Attorney General, shall determine how military and national security assets, training, non-lethal capabilities, and personnel can most effectively be utilized to prevent crime. Here he's talking about helping and assisting state and local governments, or law enforcement, not governments, law enforcement, who would then go out and do the bidding of Donald Trump's immigration services people. Because ICE agents are getting so much resistance from so many places. So to remedy that, the second executive order for states and local jurisdictions that obstruct the enforcement of federal immigration laws, sanctuary jurisdictions, the government shall identify appropriate federal funds to sanctuary jurisdictions, including grants and contracts for suspension or termination as appropriate. So he doesn't have the power to take away the money that Congress has appropriated to be given to these particular jurisdictions, these states, these cities that are providing due process protections, or that are getting in the way of the federal government not providing due process protections, that by stripping these sanctuary cities of the money that the Congress has appropriated for them. That's illegal. That will be litigated in the courts. But the targeting, the policing has become, you see how it's getting from the Secretary of Defense and the Attorney General will coordinate with military and national security assets and training in non-lethal capabilities. That took me back to the time where Donald Trump suggested that protesters during the George Floyd riots be shot with rubber bullets, and because rubber bullets were non-lethal. And that takes me back to that, talking about non-lethal capabilities to buffer up essentially the police force that want to assist ICE in violating the constitutional protections of due process and illegally seizing and removing people without due process of law. And so the third statement says, the AG shall provide legal resources and indemnification to law enforcement officers who unjustly incur expenses and liabilities for actions taken during the performance of their official duties to enforce the law. Well, that's talking about indemnifying overzealous police officers who go, who don't toe the line and sort of overreach their powers, but with the help of the federal government and the national security assets. And that indemnification, this mechanism shall include the use of private sector pro bono assistance for such law enforcement officers. You know, when you talk about private sector pro bono assistance, it takes me back to the law firms that have now committed and negotiated with Donald Trump, like Paul Wise and Skadden Group, to provide hundreds of millions of dollars worth of pro bono services for these law enforcement officers. You know, I don't know what other private sector pro bono assistance would be provided to law enforcement officer in regard to legal resources and indemnification of local law enforcement who are being prosecuted under state law or local law for violation of people's rights or for misconduct in how they went. And frankly, for people like Derek Chauvin to get help from the federal government through private sector pro bono assistance. It reminded me of George Floyd, and it reminded me of that indemnification and sort of removing that barrier. And, you know, sort of this is scary because it is now coming to the local level. Questions remain about whether the federal government can do this or not. Definitely cannot take away funding that has been provided to the states by Congress, appropriated by Congress. But in related news with this police state, Olga Nestorova, who is an independent journalist, and I'll put her Blue Sky post on in the references section, posted that Donald Trump will request a record $1.01 trillion in national security spending for the fiscal year beginning October 1st, more than 13% over the current year's figure, according to administration officials familiar with the matter. Now we know where that money is going to be spent. It's going to be spent in determining how military and national security assets, training, non-lethal capabilities, and personnel can most effectively be utilized to prevent crime in local jurisdictions, in state jurisdictions. It's talking about taking the national government to your doorstep. And this is where he would be getting the funding. And they are going to be the mechanism for indemnifying and immunizing police officers will come from the hundreds of millions of dollars of pro bono services that they got from people like the law groups like Paul Wise, Rifkin, and then the Skadden Group, and probably another one, I don't know. But the one that didn't go along with Donald Trump's demands, Perkins Coie, just got a federal judge to strike down Donald Trump's executive order that sanctioned the law firm, saying that his actions were unconstitutional effort to punish the firm for taking on clients and cases he dislikes. It's violation of the First, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments, and really sort of let Donald Trump's government have it. Of course, this will be appealed, and it'll go up to SCOTUS, and it would be in SCOTUS's interest to affirm the ruling of the lower court, whether it does it through opinion or just affirms it. But really, going after a law firm for representing certain clients and penalizing them for it causing them harm for it if they refuse to follow the executive order by rescinding their access to the government, then that is an unconstitutional infringement of the freedom of association of the company of the law firm, as well as the rights of those who seek to get representation from the law firm. The First Amendment violation, Fifth Amendment violation, then right to counsel violation. So we'll see how this case goes up, but it plays a role in this police state that Donald Trump is building, and he already has hundreds of millions of dollars of pro bono services to indemnify overzealous local police officers, and it brings our country to an inflection point. And it at the same time as he's doing this, there's also a coordinated attack on the press, the NPR executive order to take funding that, again, Congress has appropriated for these organizations, is an attack on the press, and it plays an important role when he's building his police state. Disabling the free press makes expansion of the police state easier because fewer people report on what's happening. Propagandists are boosted and the free press is suffocated. And that's what's happening. That's how a dictatorship takes form on a local level. I was listening to a panel of scholars from on the Legal AF podcast by Midas Touch, and they were talking about the similarities between Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump. Adolf Hitler circa 1933 and Donald Trump in 2025. And I mean, there are similarities and there are many, many, many differences. Donald Trump is far more incompetent in directing how a authoritarian state would go than Hitler. However, Donald Trump is surrounded by people who think like Hitler would, like Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon and Donald Trump himself. You have Elon Musk, who all sort of adhere to saying that there are parts, Hitler wasn't all that bad. They have at some point said that, and then having Nick Fuentes over for dinner. All of them have made sentiments towards this authoritarian dictatorship formation. And now we're seeing that we are at the crossroads of remaining a free state, a free society, or one with a police state and a national government and military presence, personnel in our cities and towns. Just because there's this, emergency due to the criminals and due to the illegal aliens. The question now remains on whether Donald Trump and POTUS can do this with state and local authorities. So, no telling, to sort of condense my point, what other national security breach can we have, and how far can we go before we say that no, Donald Trump has now gone too far in extending his federal reach if we don't stand up against this, there will be irreparable damage to our federal system of government, and state sovereignty and state jurisdictions, and create powers that are not within the core powers of the federal executive. Those are state powers. Like, why are you going into states? Why are you trying to overzealously pursue this authoritarian state in the name of an emergency that courts are saying is not an invasion or predatory incursion? Because that is not, mass migration is not, does not amount to invasion or predatory incursion. And there was a ruling by one of Donald Trump's appointees in the Southern District of Texas, Judge Rodriguez, and I did that reading in the, I think, last episode or the one before that. So, the only power that Donald Trump would have, that POTUS has, is that he would execute the laws, that he would take care that the laws be faithfully executed, meaning that provide to appropriate and to disperse the funds, the money that Congress has appropriated for these various organizations like NPR and PBS, but also to the sanctuary jurisdictions that Donald Trump is targeting, because those were appropriated by Congress. Now, he may want to try to get them out of his budget completely, and I'm sure there's going to be pushback, and there's going to be pushback from red and blue members of Congress. That's the hope. So, other than that, this issue of whether he can legally stop funding from Congress will be resolved by the Supreme Court. So, there's no telling what other pro bono services would aid the national effort to militarize and terrorize America and American citizens by weaponizing local police. And the mechanism, if it affords for legal services, and then also combating, determine how to trade and provide personnel for effectively preventing crime on the local level. Whether that funding is going to come from Congress or not, is Congress going to make that one of the parts of the increase in the national security funding that Olga Nesterova reported on? Like, that's a question. Like, if Congress then funds what Donald Trump intends to do, then Congress will have sanctioned this police state onto the states. And only the Supreme Court will be in the way of interpreting. And at that point, you sort of wonder, what's the Marshal Service going to do if Donald Trump orders them to stand down? That's why it's so important right now that there's the person who's going to be nominated to be head of the Marshal Service is being asked this question. And just to tell you, I'm going to end with this last thing. This is just news and media coming up with the budget proposal that Donald Trump is talking about. That includes this increase in national security while he's cutting or threatening to cut money from sanctuary jurisdictions that provide protections for people who are undocumented or people with temporary status or people who have immigration issues in order for them to get their due process. And if we don't stand up against this on a grassroots level, there will be irreparable damage to our system of society. Because we're going to see police Humvees and police tanks in our cities. We're going to see local police tactics and personnel, whether they be directly government personnel or pro bono services by, say, I don't know, Oath Keepers, 3%ers, Proud Boys. They can also provide some legal training and, non-lethal capabilities and personnel, especially, because that would be something that Donald Trump directly wouldn't want to do at the beginning by directly allowing the there may be collaborations with these extremist organizations that we don't know about. That's also part in my head. But yeah, he's talking about legal resources and indemnification of law enforcement officers, and that expense and liabilities for their official duties. What official duties are we talking about in this context of these two executive orders? To go after and more aggressively pursue whom this administration perceives as criminals. Now it's starting with illegal aliens, but then Donald Trump just has to designate some other part of some other community or some other demographic to be the enemy. You don't know that. We as the country is deporting American citizens, so we're already there. We're already at the point where, and then they're invading homes of citizens, of American citizens, like in Oklahoma, and tearing through their things, making them stand outside in their underwear. So we're already there. And Donald Trump is moving that even further. And I wanted to talk about this. And I think it's important that people talk about it. And I know I get sometimes a little muddled up, but, I think this is a moment that everybody should really wake up and realize that we are in a really, really, really dangerous place as a country. And as Donald Trump is doing this with his police state, there's a cutting of funding at CDC by almost half in his proposed budget. Its chronic disease center was slated for elimination entirely, a proposal that came as a shock to many states and city health officials. I mean, the poor will die because they cannot afford health care. That's what Donald Trump's budget is saying to you. People will be taken from the streets and not provided due process with the help of local police officers and state resources, and none of us are safe because there's about 200 some people in El Salvador and God knows how many detained across the United States who did not get due process of law. And Donald Trump keeps circulating I am the chief executive, I have these powers, these core authorities, I have, foreign affairs powers, and therefore the court has no jurisdiction and all of this jargon, when the truth of the matter is the issue is not any of those foreign powers. The issue is due process of law. The issue is the applicability of the law that he invoked, the Alien Enemies Act, and a court has already said that it's not applicable. So I hope that Supreme Court moves at a pace with where we are as a country and also sees what POTUS is doing. This news should be at least talked about once a day for the next month or for the next 3 months, because that's the time frame that Donald Trump's given the AG and the Defense Department and the Department of Homeland Security the time to come up with all of these things, demands, in order to safeguard American homeland. With that said, I've already talked for over 25 minutes. Thank you so much for being here. Please go and read the executive orders. They're not that long. You'll realize and you'll feel the chills. If you've been keeping up with the news and watching what Pam Bondi is doing with weaponizing the DOJ. So pay attention and stay safe, everybody. Remember to like, share, and subscribe.